Hello and welcome back to Let's Talk More on Monday. Today we are continuing our Issue 9 Identity Contributor series. So every time a new issue comes out, we have our contributors come onto the podcast and talk about what it was like to contribute to these issues, what it means to them, and some extra thoughts about their article that maybe didn't make the print. So I'm very happy to be joined today by Karen Young. I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself here in a moment, but if you're listening to this, thank you so much for joining us. And if you enjoy this interview, make sure to go join us on Patreon, where we're going to dig a little deeper with Karen. And if you join us there, you are supporting our internship program, which is very near and dear to our hearts as it helps young women get started in the professional realm. So thank you for joining me, Karen. We're so excited to have you.
Great. Thanks for having me, Chloe.
Yeah, so for our listeners who may not have listened to or read your article yet, will you tell them who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am a native-born Hoosier, and for my job, I am an attorney. I've been an attorney. Next year will be 20 years that I've been an attorney. Graduated from Indiana University McKinney Law School here in 2004, and have been practicing law in the business space. So I'm a corporate lawyer. I also work with nonprofits. And so most of my clients are small businesses and smaller and growing nonprofit organizations that are just starting out, 5-10 years old, starting to hire employees and I help work on their day-to-day legal services that they need for their businesses.
Yeah, amazing. And your article really painted a wonderful picture of what you do and the contributions that you make to those women and minority-owned businesses. So my first question for you is just, what was it like for you to write this article? What was your experience like contributing?
Yeah, so I do a lot of writing, but frankly, in my job, my writing is kind of boring. I don't talk a lot about myself. I'm writing, contracts and bylaws and the like. And so this was a really fun experience, a bit challenging to think back through. And I don't know that I've really sat down and thought about it and read or written down how I translated some of the growth and opportunities and experiences I've had in my personal life and how that bleeds into and marinates into my professional life. So it was really kind of eye-opening, a good practice, a good activity to really put into writing how and why I come to and how I work in my practice area. And because of my interest in supporting the communities that I care about, specifically women and minorities, over 80% of my almost 300 clients are women or minority owned or both.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big number.
It is. It's a lot. It's a really great space to be in.
Yeah. So, with that being said, what do you feel like equity means to you when you're serving these people?
Yeah, I think equity, we've all hopefully learned that equity isn't treating everyone the same, but giving people the access and experience they need to be successful, thrive, and level the playing field in whatever way the different business needs it. And so providing legal services is it's not exactly like healthcare, but it's similar, that overlooked and underserved, marginalized people groups haven't gotten the best at those, professional services, and legal services fall into that category. Let alone, legal services are generally seen as very expensive. You don't have insurance to cover when you need to go talk to a lawyer like you do when you need to go to the hospital or the doctor's office. Right. And so it's out-of-pocket costs, a lot of upfront costs with retainers, et cetera. And so it's an exclusive group that folks that get to work with attorneys. And so recognizing and knowing that in my professional life, when I went out on my own, have my own practice and get to decide who is my client, where I'm going to spend my professional time and career, I chose to support those communities that I want to have business growth and nonprofit growth, which is, my expertise. And I want to share that with groups that are already coming together and growing. Women and minorities are the fastest growing groups of entrepreneurs in our country, probably globally as well. And so I wanted to support those growing efforts and existing, businesses and nonprofits that has been around for a long time, and our economy wouldn't be the same without them. And so when I talked about, it's very personal to me, the equity piece. And so taking that personal piece that I care about and pushing into the profession, which is my daily grind and 8 to 5 or 8 to whenever professional work, it was kind of a no-brainer. And so I just started networking in those spaces where women and minority entrepreneurs showed up, and just kept showing up because I wanted to work with those kinds of companies and nonprofits.
Right. So in layman's terms, what would you say that you do for these businesses to help them, level the playing field, like you said?
For sure. So I wrote in the article that business attorneys and I, whoever the business attorney is, we do the same kind of day-to-day things. So I'll briefly talk about that, which is helping negotiate a contract, advocate for my clients in what they need. Something has gone, someone's not paying them, or someone they need to pay that shouldn't, that isn't acceptable. Maybe there's a business dispute over an issue of money or land or a contract. So I get involved there. I help employers with their employee issues, whether that's an employee handbook, hiring and firing someone, doing an internal investigation, just the day-to-day legal things that a small business or organization might see. Yeah. And so to bring equity into that space, I don't think it's a formula or a really a textbook kind of thing to follow, but rather I pride myself on, treating everyone kindly and fairly, how I would like to be treated, and expect service providers to treat me. And I don't shy away from or overlook issues of racism when I see them. Yeah. And there's a couple of different things. Like, I show up for clients and I have to advocate for them and be the voice for them, because our culture won't pay attention to whoever that is if they don't see a lawyer's name tied to it. And that's true across the, in a variety of situations, not specifically minority and women-owned businesses. However, minority and women-owned businesses and overlooked groups of people haven't had the access to the attorney, so they have fewer advocates. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I'm speaking on behalf of one of my clients, I bring the full force of the law, of me for whomever that client is that hasn't had that before sometimes, or just has had it before, but they are now, hiring me to do that for them. Mm-hmm. And so some of this, the nature of my work is bringing equity, because lawyers are to bring justice. But I hope that I am hopefully not unique, but intentional in working with people, not shying away from someone who doesn't speak like me, talk like me, look like me, think like me even, right. And working with them and figuring out a path forward. If I need to get a translator, if I need to travel to someone, if I need to meet them, in person versus virtually, whatever those needs are of clients, or reschedule a meeting 3 times because this person is, really busy and it may be not as organized as a business owner, whatever the difficulties are. I'm hoping that your listeners know, talent is doled out equally. It's the opportunities that aren't. And so I know that all of my clients have equal amounts of talent and yet have not always had the access or resources equally and fairly doled out to them. And so anything I can do to push that forward and then connect them within my network, or do anything to aid my clients, I do that across the board. And so by showing up in these spaces and having more women and minority owned clients, I'm helping more of those types of businesses and organizations move the ball forward and have access to maybe not cheap, but cost-effective and, manageable legal services to move their businesses forward, which creates wealth, stability, opportunity, and profit margin, and all of that will bleed down to their family and their kids going to college, and et cetera, as they grow their business as entrepreneurs in those spaces.
Yeah. I think we've heard this on the podcast before when we've talked to other, women professionals, minority professionals, like they just feel like even if they do have access to resources or they have like a great education, they're still working that much harder to be heard, to be understood, to be appreciated in these professional spaces. So I think you're doing a very important thing of bridging that gap.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, like talking in lay terms, I do try and break things down for clients and not sound like a disconnected, lawyer. And clients of all shapes and sizes have commented they appreciate that I make it understandable. I break it down. Maybe what I read and how I prepped is a little bit, heady or legalese, and I try and break it down and be real practical with clients and working with small businesses in general, they may never have worked with a business attorney before. So I'm educating my clients along the way equally. And I always make the question, like, I don't mean to insult your intelligence. Are you tracking with me? Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen this before? Because I don't want to repeat it if you already know it. And just try and be really conscious of where people are and not dumbing things down, but at the same time making it understandable and going as deep, into what the issue is. But as most lawyers, we bill by the hour. And so time is money and it adds up. So trying to, balance that, spending time and yet not overdoing it and giving enough information to make everyone comfortable and build trust along the way. But actually, absolutely, speaking up on behalf of my clients, I have quite the strong sense of justice. And so if someone's been wronged, even if it is outside the realm of racism, there are a few times that it's been very apparent in my practice, and I'm just like, you got me on the wrong day, and I am not. This will not stand, and I will get on the horn and speak to whomever. And it's not the same as in maybe criminal law and that kind of space where I'm saving people from jail time. But their business is just like my business is. It's their baby. It's what they've poured so much of their blood, sweat, and tears into, and protecting that or helping it move forward instead of backward is really, really important to me.
Yeah. And I'm sure so beneficial for them as well.
Yeah.
So you touched on this a little bit in your article, and I've been curious to ask if you have read Untamed by Glennon Doyle.
Yes.
So I was very much reminded of that novel as I was reading your article, and just talking, she has a whole section about unlearning your racism, right? And how she tried to show up in these spaces and was almost immediately struck down because they were like, why aren't you letting the people who know about this raise their voice? And you touched on something, very, very similar in your article as well. But, where did you start, to try to unlearn that intrinsic racism that's just built into all of us?
Yeah. So it was well prior to 2020, but it goes back a long time. I think one of the questions they ask you in intrinsic bias or unconscious bias classes is think back to the first time you can remember recognizing race. And through one of those exercises, a lot of things clicked for me. And one of those was, I remembered my parents moved me from a small private school to public school when I was entering my 4th grade year. So I would have been 10 years old. And it was in a township here around Indianapolis. And all of the African-American students that were at my school had been bussed out for integration purposes from IPS districts and downtown districts out to the suburbs for schooling. And so there were many, many more African-American students in my class than had been at the private school where I had one. There was one girl in my class who was African-American. So I recall as a 4th grader looking at 2 boys who I knew in my class standing next to each other, and it coming into my head, they don't look alike. All Black people don't look alike. And I immediately felt shame. And I immediately realized there's something wrong, that before right now, I thought that all African-American people looked alike. That's not right. But I thought that before right now with looking at these 2 boys. I never spoke to an adult about it. I never verbalized it. I just knew that wasn't right, that I had thought that. And I was raised very church-oriented, Christian background, all of that. And the love your neighbor, everyone's equal kind of mantra, and heavy into, your thoughts. God knows your thoughts. And knowing that thought, I felt sinful. I had this, wrong thing that I believed. Yeah. So from that point on, really just recognizing different things as I evolved. So fast forward to my high school years, I was writing, my papers, and anytime I had a choice to write a paper, I was writing on Brown versus Board of Education and Plessy v. Ferguson and the court cases about that. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, and I was writing about segregation and integration and busing and freedom rides and anything, any historical figure, but I was really still fairly shallow in my knowledge and education. So then fast forward to, my early 20s and entering into law school and some different decisions I was making. I was reading at the time, and Waking Up White came out, and what does it mean to be, just a variety of different books. But I was attending a place of worship it was called Racial Reconciliation at the time instead of social justice or racial justice, and African-American pastor and black and white, just working on the black and white issue here in Indianapolis. It's so, historically horrible. And through all of that time, just working towards and moving along in my anti-racism journey. And it was at that church, I was probably now 21. And as an adult, I remember we all held hands around the congregation, and I was holding hands with an adult African-American man. And I was like, I don't think I've held hands with a grown African-American man before in college, in high school, but yeah. It was like lots of those types of things of and that's not right. Like, what's the deal here? And I realized if I saw two men walking down the street, one African-American, more scared of the African-American for no other reason than his race. And I knew in my heart that was racism. And so when I moved downtown to Indianapolis, when I started law school, I was like, I am going to work to root this out and be a part of that. I stumbled. I offended a few people in law school by just saying, oh, I'm so glad you're my so-and-so friend. And they're like, why can't I just be your friend? Why do I have to have a label? I did not do it perfect at all. Yeah. And just working it out. Because I don't know what I was, but I was just, verbal about how I was going through things. And so early 20s on through, my husband and I chose to be foster parents and adoptive parents and different things. And so working children in and out of our home that are not our same race, we would have never been willing or interested in doing that had we not been on the path of our own anti-racism journeys and rooting all of that out. And so for me, it's a long answer to a question of, it started so long ago when I was very young. I didn't realize it until some of these classes I went to. I did, the Peace Learning Center's unconscious bias training. Indianapolis Public Schools puts out race and equity training that I've gone through, reading, doing group reading books, in book clubs that are dealing with predominantly white people, of dealing with racism, which is a white issue, So going through all these things, it's not ending. The podcasts I subscribe to, the things I listen to, it continues on, with the hope that whatever racism or prejudice I have remaining, I keep rooting out and working that out of my heart and life and making amends as needed as I go.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, as you said, you experience shame when you realize these things, but to not shy away from it, to almost lean into it and be like, yes, this is shameful. What can I do instead of thinking this way or feeling this way? Is take that shame and make it actionable.
Well, and I think there are all these, milestones along someone's anti-racism journey, and that shame and white guilt and white woman's tears, all of those things are along there. I've had family members get mad at me and say, you're mad God made you white. And I'm like, I don't know where to put that, but I've had someone tell me that, It's like, no, I just am learning the truth and I'm not happy about it. But I recognize I am in this package and my name's Karen. So, it is.
Right.
But dealing with the reality of it and not shying away from addressing privilege and issues of race, we're beholden to do that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, before we wrap up this episode, I'm going to give you a chance to plug anything that you want our listeners to know about. If there's a way that they can connect with you, how can they find you?
Absolutely, for sure. So my website is hayesyounglaw.com, HAYESYOUNG law.com. And I have a website out there for legal services, and the social that I'm on is LinkedIn. So just find me Karen Young on LinkedIn or Karen Hayes Young, and that's where I'm at. Those are pretty much the two socials. You can get to me through my website or my LinkedIn messages. Slide on in there. I'd be happy to connect with anybody out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and make sure to head over to our Patreon, where we're going to dig a little deeper with Karen and answer some of those other questions about some resources and other things that we can do to confront and address our racism. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chloe.
All right. We will see you next week when we talk more on Monday. See you next time.